2020 was supposed to be a decisive year for climate action. Countries were expected to put forward new, more ambitious climate plans in accordance with the Paris Agreement on climate change, thus kicking off a decade of ambition. The COVID pandemic has significantly impacted this planned sustainable development trajectories of the countries. A climate resilient path is particularly important for the developing regions of Africa and India. They are the global economy's two most significant growth poles and fastest growing regions, yet are the most vulnerable to climate change that risks their development outcomes. The pandemic has demonstrated more than ever before to the regions of Africa and India that the core aspect of SDG agenda, energy access, and most importantly, climate action are central to their resilience as economies. To discuss the COVID's impact on climate action and how India and Africa navigate their development agenda in a climate-constrained world in the aftermath of the COVID crisis, I'm delighted to be joined today on the 8th episode of CNED Development Dialogue by an eminent guest, Dr. Youba Sokona, Vice President of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Dr. Sokona, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. And I'm delighted to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sokona. So let me begin with this question that as we know that nations begin to direct all resources towards addressing the post-pandemic economic crisis, we experts rightly fear that the response to the pandemic is likely to take away the political attention and economic commitment required towards the global response to climate change. And scientific finding from the IPCC underscore the need for greater ambition in the country's climate action. Now, you as the key part of IPCC, how do you think can the developing countries keep their momentum for climate action going as they battle the current coronavirus or COVID challenges before them?
I think the main issue is that we are still in the crisis, the pandemic, the COVID crisis. We are not yet out, because if one can see what is happening here, I'm living in Geneva currently, what happened here in Europe, because there is a thinking of locking down in France, in some of the European countries. The pandemic is not yet behind us. Having said that, there is the pandemic reveals that how our operating systems is not from developing country or industrialized country are fragile, and then we are not prepared to face some of the big events that hurt all the people, all the economy, and obviously it has some impact on the climate. And it, to a certain extent, as most of the activities of the IPCC in the sixth assessment report has been delayed because of our inability to have a physical meeting. And at the same time also, we have seen some of the slight positive impact of the lockdown in terms of emissions. There is a slight reduction of emission because of the economic activities are down. And also, we thought that our behavior, the changing of the behavior will be something that is challenging. And then the COVID have demonstrated also that there is some possibility. And there is some positive aspect, there is some negative aspect. And then there is a need of linking the two together. That's very important.
Okay, that's a very interesting insight. Now, could you tell us what what do you see as would be the key impact of the current crisis in meeting the Agenda 2030, especially the clean energy access and climate change commitments for developing countries, especially Africa and India?
What we have seen during the period, what is also growing in many of, I'm very familiar with the African case, what we have seen in the African case. And fortunately, because most of the people have predicted it will have a massive impact in the continent in terms of death, but that does not happen. But it has a massive impact in terms of economic activities to slow down livelihood of the people. And that related to a large extent to energy issue, because a large part of the good in the continent are imported. Because with the lockdown and then with the inability of using the transport system, and that have affected, because a large part of the food in the continent is imported, a large part of the goods, and then some of the services are imported, and then the industrial development of the continent is minimal, and that largely is related to energy, because the energy supply is one of the major problems the continent is facing. Because if you take West Africa, the electricity tariff is a minimum in the best cases. When they have it, it's between 15 to 20 cents. If you go to certain area, it go to $50 to $1, 50 cents to $1. In that case, the industrialization of the continent is completely forthcoming. And then using the conventional, the traditional system. And then what the COVID have revealed is that we have to rely largely in the local production on many different aspects. In order to do so, we need to develop the energy systems. And then the renewables give to us a huge opportunity of dealing with that. And then to a larger extent, there is some similarities between India and Africa in large part of India. Take the city of Delhi. There is two cities in Delhi. There is a New Delhi, there is the Old Delhi. And then the Old Delhi is largely similar to many African cities. And so that there is a number of issues, number of perspectives one can share. And if we take also the production system, the agricultural system, the small scale farming system, and then where energy also is critical, is an input, and then there is some similarity, there is some lessons, and then one can learn, and then that can be transferred from one side to the other side. And then those are the areas where is fundamental, is critical in the African context, and then to look at in the climate perspective, in the development perspective.
Yeah, so Youba, you have kind of, reiterated, re-emphasized the point that how critical clean energy transition post-COVID will be for the economies going forward. So what kind of partnership and means of implementation, whether finance, technology, etc., do you think are required to push for this clean energy transition in the economies post-COVID era?
I think there is a large, to a large extent, Africa can learn from some of the experiences in India. And then the two parts of the world are sharing, and some commonalities. If you take one of the key energy element in the household sector, that the use of charcoal and firewood for cooking. And then we all know, and then this is very well documented, how it's harmful for the health, in particular the women and the women and the kids, and then how also it has an impact on the land degradation issues and so on and so forth. And one can imagine, and then this is happening in India, a transition and then from using charcoal and firewood for cooking to electricity, and then some of the lessons we are trying actually to learn, and then how the electric cooking, and particularly is happening in India, and then how that can be transferred in Africa. Unfortunately, at the global level, no one is addressing these fundamental and big issues. This one area. Second area, we take the farming system. In the African context, there is only 2 to 3% of agricultural land that are irrigated. And then if we look at the centralized energy system, there is no way you can extend in a short and a near future the expansion of the agricultural sector and then for irrigation. And then if we look at the renewables, and then if we look at also the cost related to renewable, and there is, because it has decreased dramatically, the technology has improved, and there is a wide range of possibility. And the Solar Alliance that has been initiated by the Indian government could be a vehicle if in the both sides we work together and then to look at what are the communalities, what are the areas where it's possible to transfer a technology, where it's possible to mutually learn from each other, and then to look at also the possibility that exists in the climate sector, because there is a number of financial mechanisms related to the climate that we can use that to mobilize resources for that.
Youba, how do you think can the upcoming COP, the Conference of Party 26, help push the climate action agenda and SDG when it is held next year?
I am not a climate negotiator because I am dealing with the science, and then the negotiation is related to some of the discussion related to the Paris Agreement. But beyond that, I think it's much more important that some of the countries on the region get together and then to look at the interrelationship between development agenda. This makes more important. And then if we have a clear understanding of our development agenda, and then the next element will be how you make the development more sustainable. And this is how we bring in the SDGs in the equation. And then the next element will be how we make that compatible with climate. And then so that we have the relationship between the 3 different elements. And then we can learn some of the lessons of the COVID, because COVID happens as a big surprise to us. And then we have to reorganize everything. And then we are just trying to have a clarity of where things need to be tackled. And then that will help us and then to interrogate the priority of the development area, how we make that sustainable, and then how it will be compatible with climate. We have to have to give in mind, sustainable development, sustainability is an aspiration, a long-term aspiration. And then it is not something you just reach and then it's finished. And it's require enduring effort. It requires continuity, and then it requires a wider cooperation and solidarity.
That's a great insight. It requires cooperation, solidarity, and it's a continuous process. So going forward, Youba, what do you think are the areas of cooperation or opportunities for partnership between India and Africa for sustainability, especially the energy access that you are emphasizing and clean energy transition post the pandemic?
As I indicated, because many people also in the context of Africa, a lot of discussion are happening around SDGs, Agenda 2030, but limited discussion, limited attention is put on the African Agenda 2063, because that has been conceived and defined by the African in 2063, what the continent want to be looked at. And that was prior to the SDGs agreement in 2015. And then to a certain extent, the SDGs are mirroring the African Agenda 2063. I think it will be very important that some of the key stakeholders in India and in Africa, we can group them in 3 key clusters. The first cluster will be at the political level. What can be done in the 2 regions at the political level, and then from the higher political level to the lower, including the municipalities, and then to look at that perspective, what kind of cooperation, what kind of linkages might be possible. The second cluster is on the knowledge on the scientific community, because there is a huge opportunity. I happen to have some connection back to early 80s with a number of institutions in India, research institutions, and to conduct a research on energy issues, access to energy issues, with some of the eminent Indian scientists, such as Amulya Reddy in Bangalore, or Ashok Khoshla in Delhi, or Anil Argawal in Delhi. And then we used to work together on the scientific community, the research community. There is a number of things we can learn. And then the practitioner community, and then that is from the private sector to the civil society organization and other. And then to look at those 3 different clusters, and then to identify where there is a win-win and mutual learning possibility and perspective. And then that will inform the implementation of the African Agenda 2063, and that is in line also of the Agenda 2030, and then that will be compatible with climate.
Well, thank you for, as I understand, you've gained immensely from your insights. If you may allow me to sum up from your insights and discussion, I feel that, there are 3 very key points that you have highlighted. One, that is, COVID has definitely exposed fundamental weakness in the conventional value chain and the consequent impact it had on energy security. Therefore, the speed of deployment of renewable energy solution in the regions to meet the energy supply gap will obviously remain critical for these economies. As you emphasized, for India and African countries, accelerating progress towards low carbon, sustainable energy access in a post-COVID world will, I think, not just an option, but an imperative. The second vital point that you mentioned was that, and the second most important takeaway is while the government will be the champion and facilitator of sound partnership in areas of sustainable development, there is a need for increased collaboration between research institutions in India and African countries that can allow knowledge, capital, and skills to flow from both the regions. And the private sector will be a key actor in ensuring the scale of investments required to bridge this gap. To bridge the energy gap. In creating sustainable growth, the private sector's role is vital also in employment generation for 2 of the youngest labor market, I would like to add. And lastly, in the post-COVID recovery, while India and African countries should accelerate the inevitable and urgently required shift to a low carbon, resilient, regenerative economy and create a new development model, their experiences, including success achieved as well as challenges faced, offer a constructive sharing of example between the two regions. Thank you so much, Youba, for sharing with us your critical insights on this subject. Thank you so much for joining us in this dialogue.
If I may, I would love India and Africa putting a strong call and committed, and then for the phase out by 2050 of cooking with charcoal and firewood, based on the experience of India in induction stoves fueled by electricity coming from renewable, particularly the solar. And then if the world can take that commitment, because the spillover effect will be huge, and then that could be one of the key transition, and then the two regions can take and put forward. And then if you are serious about the SDGs, because those are a huge implication on all the SDGs, inequality, gender aspect, health aspect, tech transfer aspect, and so on and so forth. And all the key stakeholders I indicated will be involved in that process. And this is concrete, it's feasible, but it requires a political will.
Another great insight, Youba. With that and with that expectation, we conclude this episode of Development Dialogue. We thank you very much for sparing your time and joining us at the discussion today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.